6 months in Washington, and Congressman James Lankford still hasn't solved all the nation's problems. Hi, I'm Chris Casteel in the Washington Bureau of the Oklahoman here with Congressman James Lankford. Congressman, what's taking so long?
I know. We may need at least another month to get this solved.
Well, you came up here. You obviously were sworn in January for your first term, right, and in the majority as a Republican from Oklahoma City. Right. And you came at a time with some pretty thorny problems. I mean, the nation's facing some serious debt issues. We got ongoing talks right now. I mean, tell me about your first 6 months. And I guess this is really what you wanted to do. Is you wanted to come up here and confront some of these things.
It is. This is a time that a lot of people said to me, why in the world would you want to go to Congress during this time? Mm-hmm. But the issues are large, mm-hmm, and they are difficult in what we're dealing with. We have way overspent what we can afford. And I feel like this is a family that's been living on a credit card, and at some point they realized, oh, we really have to pay that bill at some point. Mm-hmm. And now it's the difficulty of, but we've always eaten at nice restaurants, and we've always had nice cars, and we've always had these things. We have to decide what are within our means that we can really do. And we're still driving a car, it's just not as nice of a car. We're still eating, we're just not eating as nice in some things. And it's all those dynamics that you still have to make those hard decisions on. That's where we are as a nation, and it's hard.
Right.
Those are difficult things for people to be able to swallow and say, but we want to keep the same thing we've always had, but we just can't afford that.
Right. Now you're on the Budget Committee, which is obviously gives you a good look at, in a macro sense and to some extent a micro sense, you know, what the spending is made up of. And right, you've seen some appropriations bills. The House is actually moving spending bills. What has anything stood out to you about that in terms, you know, I know you came up here determined to cut government spending, but what have you seen?
Well, some of the things that we've started, and it may sound just odd, but we've actually started going back through the correct process again, mm-hmm, on things. It's been, I think we're now up to 800 days since the previous budget was even passed.
Right.
Since 1974, there was a Budget Act where the House passed a budget, the Senate passed a budget, and they worked through reconciliation line to combine the two and then to have a nation's budget. Well, several years ago, the House and the Senate just stopped doing it, mm-hmm, and they just said, we're just not going to have a budget anymore.
Well, it was actually just a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah. And so that reality of, okay, the nation needs a budget. Mm-hmm. The nation needs a plan and a conversation on it. We've begun again. Mm-hmm. So we did the 2011 budget once we got here. Then we've now started in the 2012 and finished that in the House, sent over to the Senate. The Senate's not picked that up yet. But some of those things may not be dramatic, mm-hmm, but they're the restarting again of a process.
But I guess what I was trying to get, what have you seen in the programs themselves? I mean, have you seen, you know, that's easy to cut, or that actually is kind of difficult? I mean, what have you seen in terms of actually getting down into the nuts and bolts of a budget?
A couple things. The more I get into the budget, the more I see how out of balance we really are, mm-hmm, and how bad this really is. Mm-hmm. The second thing is I hear people all the time talk about, when you're making this cut and this must be easy. No, all of these cuts are hard. Mm-hmm. None of these are simple cuts, and all these affect families and people. And so that's been the challenge, is to be able to go into it. Entitlements are a major part of our budget. 60% of what we do is mandatory spending and entitlements. In any real conversation about spending, you've got to look at that and say, how are we going to do that? The other part of it is there's really two ways to get after dollars. One is you make government more efficient to where it costs less to actually do that same thing. If we're driving up the cost of it based on additional work requirements, additional regulatory things, additional approvals and processes and all these things, if we're just driving up the cost of it, then we need to look at how do we bring the cost of that down. Now, that doesn't get us more dollars in it, but it makes what we're doing cheaper.
Right.
And so that's a part of what we're looking at. The UMRA reforms I've been working on, the unfunded mandates reform, mm-hmm, that's a big piece of that, is how do we have fewer mandates going down to states and cities, and quite frankly in the federal government as well.
Right. Now, you brought up an interesting point about the House is doing the budget, Senate's not. I mean, you've got this situation here where you've got a very divided government. Right. You've got a Democratic White House, Democratic Senate, and a Republican House.
Right.
And all this work that the Republican House is doing, and they actually are passing, you guys actually are passing bills, passing spending bills, passing other things, right, go nowhere once you get over the Senate. So, I mean, is it a waste of time? And I mean, how do you resolve this? What ultimately is going to have to happen for this divided government to actually function? Because it does seem dysfunctional right now.
Well, it is, and things are very, very slow. It's not a waste of time, though, because the budget that we're passing and the appropriations bills that we're passing and sending to the Senate, which currently the Senate's doing nothing with, mm-hmm, we get to the end of this fiscal year, they're going to panic and say, oh, we have to do a continuing resolution.
Right, well, which is a way to keep the spending going without actually having
a budget.
Separate,
right. And so when we get to that spot, we are able to pull out of the drawer and say, these are the bills we passed. So this becomes the foundation to any kind of agreement that happens. So our hope is that they would at some point start passing budgets and start passing appropriations as they're supposed to do. If they don't, even when we get to the end of the year and there's the panic on their side of what do we do, we're ready, and we're ready to go with what we feel like is the right way.
Right. Well, let me talk to you a little bit about how you're meshing with the rest of the House. I mean, have you made any Democratic friends yet?
I do.
I've noticed that kind of the partisan tone of your campaign is carried over somewhat to the public statements that you make about things up here, and I was just wondering, is that productive? I mean, a lot of people say, it's time for an era of a bipartisanship,
sure.
and that just doesn't exist here. And I was wondering what you think you can do to.
Yeah, the key for me is to keep my statements that I'm making based on the issues, not on people. There are areas I very much disagree with some of the Democrat leaders that are here. We do have a very different perspective on capitalism and on free markets and on regulatory environment.
I mean, is it really different, do you think?
Oh, yes. Let me tell you, one of the very first meetings I was in was a hearing with 4 different owners of companies, and we were talking about job creation and what's happening, and the conversation turned towards regulatory reform. There was a Democrat member of our committee, which I'll leave unnamed, who goes into a line of questioning saying they're very uncomfortable about all this conversation about regulatory reform because the more compliance that we require from the federal government, the more businesses have to hire compliance officers, and the more we add regulations, the more they have to add people as regulators, and his statement was that creates jobs in America. Now,
so through the government.
Through the government, that's exactly right. And my statement to the business owners were, would you rather produce goods and services or would you rather hire compliance officers? His perspective really was, and we talked about it, his perspective really was, we need to continue to add regulations because that adds additional jobs in America. Well, those to me are make-work jobs. That's not producing goods. That's not increasing the quality of services. That's filling out forms to send into the federal government.
Sure.
That is a very different perspective of what it means to do job growth, because I see it as we need to reduce some of the regulatory burden on some of these companies that just make no sense. They're just paperwork to fill out to us in Washington that we save on some shelf and never use. That may create a job, but it doesn't create a growing economy. It actually slows the economy down.
To get back to the question, though, I mean, have you made any Democratic friends?
I have, actually.
Okay.
I have. I've had several Democrats to get a chance to interact with. We have spirited conversations on several of these issues, but we get a chance to interact often. And one of my Democrats, friends I've been connecting with, is now leaving, Dan Boren. I've had great conversations with Dan since I've been here, and he's been a great counsel in several areas just to be able to talk back and forth on some process things.
Now, you said when you came up here, I remember the first week you were here and you did the ceremonial swearing in, and you spoke to your family and supporters about wanting to represent all of your constituents, all 700,000 odd constituents in central Oklahoma. Have you been able to do that? And I mean, you voted basically the Republican line since you've been here. You obviously got, half the registration in that district is it's close to half, I think, is Democrat. I mean, how do you represent everybody and vote straight Republican the whole time?
Well, it's actually not been straight Republican the whole time. You get a chance to look at it because there have been some times I've disagreed with leadership in the direction we're going. But I've had town hall meetings all over all 3 counties to make sure I'm interacting and listening to people. I've made sure I'm in all areas, whether that be in the library at MLK and 23rd Street, whether that be with meeting Latino leaders in central Oklahoma City, whether that be meeting with leaders in Edmond, whether that be meeting with leadership in Pottawatomie County, heading down to Kanawha, whatever it may be. I'm trying to connect with as many people as we can so I can get a chance to listen and hear. And there's really 2 aspects of being an elected leader. One is the casework side of it, helping people navigate the federal bureaucracy. That's a lot of what the Oklahoma offices do in Shawnee and in Oklahoma City. Absolutely. And we interact with everybody and help in every way that we can. Regardless of party, regardless of background, we want to be able to help.
Right.
And so whether I'm meeting with city leaders in Spencer or I'm meeting with city leaders in Edmond, we're talking about the same issues and how we can help.
Right, but in terms of your voting record,
that's correct. And we have a legislative agenda that's here. And that I am a conservative. I'm unashamedly so a conservative. And that's what they elected me to be, and that's what I've tried to continue to stay while I'm here.
Let's get back to the debt ceiling talks real quick. Obviously, at least according to the Treasury Department, you've got till August 2nd to do something, and before who knows what, default on existing obligations, immediate and across the board, drastic cuts in spending. You're starting to see some cracks on both sides. Obviously, the Democrats have, said they'd be willing to look at entitlements. according to the Washington Post this morning, Obama will even look at Social Security. And maybe the majority leader of the House, Eric Cantor, said that they might look at closing some tax loopholes. Where are you on the tax question? I think, we all know where Tom Coburn has kind of staked some ground on this, that it's not a tax increase to get rid of a subsidy for ethanol and not offset it somewhere else with the net. Do you feel that way, or do you feel like every time you close a tax loophole, if it's $6 billion over 10 years or whatever, you've got to cut taxes somewhere else so there's not a net increase in revenue? Where are you on that?
Some of these subsidies,
as clearly as possible, because it gets really
it does get very
into the
convoluted
weeds
on
really
it.
quick.
The simplest I can make of it is that we have a tax system that's way too complicated. We do need to simplify this. The same thing we did in the 1980s when they cleared a lot of loopholes out, they cleared a lot of exceptions out, and made the tax system simpler, and their statement was fairer at that point.
This is the Reagan tax reform of 86.
That process needs to happen again. Now, I have no idealistic dream that we'll simplify the system and it'll stay simplified. 30 years from now, somebody will be complaining again, it's more complicated again. But we've got to restart it again and get down to that. To me, that is taking out some of these subsidies and these loopholes. So many of these are built in for specific companies and specific industries. One of my favorites was 2 years ago when they did a tax subsidy, or actually it was a tax credit for that one, for wooden arrow manufacturers in the Northwest United States. And you look at it and you think, well,
there's only one, right?
Right. And you're looking at it thinking, okay, that's identifying a single company and a single industry and saying we're going to give them a tax credit to be able to bail out this company. That's the kind of stuff you start going after, and it's all over the place. So that simplifies it. Now, I'm not one that says, okay, if we take out that tax credit to wooden arrow manufacturers in the Northwest United States, we need to make sure that we, then correct it over here. I think we just take that out because that's wrong, and we should have ever done that subsidy in the first place on that. Now, on the other side of it, I'm not one that says, okay, we need to raise taxes. This is the wrong time to raise taxes. And I don't find a lot of people that are saying, gosh, we really need a lot more in tax revenue based on taxing me personally. And that's always that person, that millionaire and billionaire. The difficulty is the president's definition of millionaire and billionaire, when you actually look at the details, is any individual making $200,000 or more, or any couple making $250,000 or more. That's millionaire and billionaire. I just don't agree. So
let's get back to the tax loophole thing. Sure. So would you vote for a plan that did get rid of some tax loopholes without offsetting that used that revenue for deficit reduction, or would it have to be offset somewhere else?
Here's the simple answer on that. If you eliminate a tax loophole, the whole offsetting question is you've got to offset it somewhere else. If you eliminate a tax loophole on one person, there's not an offset for that person. Their taxes did go up on that.
For like the ethanol. Let's use the ethanol. Right, even though it's a small one, it's $6 billion a year.
Well, the $6 billion is larger than a lot of the other ones are. For instance, the president's whole hammering on the energy companies, saying we're going to try to hammer on them on all their production taxes and such. That's $3 billion a year.
And the corporate jet thing too.
The corporate jet is $4 billion over 10 years. So these are very small that he's going after.
But if you vote to eliminate those, would you also have to vote to cut taxes in
somewhere else in some of the company? No, because that company is the one that's affected. I mean, to do the whole offset thing, you've got to figure out, okay, this company got this credit, so I've got to make sure I do another credit for them. That doesn't make sense. What you want to look at is the whole economy, and to say, is the whole economy experiencing higher taxes or lower taxes? And I would say I want the whole economy and the tax rate to be the same. You don't want to pull money out of the economy and to pour it into the government to say the government continues to spend more. But the reality is, if you change a loophole, somebody is going to have their tax go up. Somebody else is going to not have that same experience. But that's the challenge of it. And even Dr. Coburn has made the comment that in that Reagan time during the 1980s, he saw his taxes go up. Other people saw theirs go down when they were simplifying the system. That will happen in the simplification of the system. So it's easy to say, no, everybody's going to stay the same, but you're going to reduce these loopholes. That's not actually true. You start dealing with loopholes, somebody's will go up, somebody else's will go down as you simplify. Yeah,
absolutely. Do you expect at the end of this process, well, first, do you expect to get a deal done by August 2nd? And second, do you expect that after it, you're going to go back to Oklahoma City, Shawnee, Seminole, and have to explain to the people back there how their Social Security and Medicare is going to change?
I don't anticipate there'll be a major agreement on the entitlement reform. I'll be shocked if there is, just because so much of the conversation's been behind closed doors. I really don't like the way the negotiations are being done right now. It is typical in the past to have one side stake out a position, the other side stake out a position, and then you work to have it. I don't know what the president's position is.
Right.
There are leaks each day on what his position is, but he's never come out and said, this is what I want to accomplish. It's always, his goal is to have a deal. And we're trying to figure out what's the deal that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I'll tell you something Senator Coburn said about that. I asked him about this closed door thing because Senator Sessions, the budget chairman or budget ranking member on the Senate side, has been complaining, and others have been complaining about this closed door process. What Coburn says is that as soon as you make your negotiating positions known, the special interests on both sides, on the liberal and conservative side, start shooting at you, and your base attacks what you're trying to do, and it crumbles. So he actually thinks it's better, and he obviously was part of the Gang of Six that was meeting behind closed doors, but he thinks it's actually smarter at this point to just keep it close to the vest. I'm just saying, I'm not saying that he's wrong, I'm just saying what he says.
We've had 7 months to be able to put this in the public arena and to allow the public to be able to engage in the ideas. If you ask someone in the public, what is the deficit reduction plan here? What is the plan we're going to have for the debt ceiling? Most people would have no idea because it's just all over the place. There's anything you pull out could be it because there seems to be no consistent plan with it. What I'm saying is Americans like to be involved. They like to know what the plan is. It's messy. It's loud. Lots of people will make all kinds of calls. They'll get on the media. They'll talk about it all kinds of different ways. People engage in it in coffee shops. That's good. Welcome to America. And so for me, I'd rather have it a little loud.
Well, maybe that's why Obama wants it done by July 22nd, so it's not a last-minute deal, because you guys are going to have to put it in bill form and then debate it. So there will be some period. It's not like going to be the night that you guys kept the government running and it came down to
honestly, we've been talking about this since January. And so I'm still trying to process through why we're waiting till even this point to settle it. A lot of us have been talking about some basic things. I'd like to see a balanced budget amendment. This is a great time with a separated government with Democrats and Republicans in leadership to do something very significant. So it's not one party ramming it through. This is a good time to do it. Some of these welfare reforms that were done during the Clinton administration were done with Republicans and Democrats. We can take on significant issues with a divided government. Is a good time to do this, and but that takes time to be able to accomplish that.
Let me ask you one last question just about your first 6 months, and that, you know, the cliche question, is anything surprised you? What surprised you the most about being here? What did you not expect, if anything?
I'd say I did not expect as much of a nebulous, undirected, moving amoeba Washington really is. In policy decisions and process and what's coming up, there seems to be no strategic plan. And I know that doesn't bring
leadership?
Well, it's just no plan, no direction on it. So you've got both the president each day bringing up something different, the House is bringing up something different, the Senate is bringing up something different, and this very messy, loud operation that seems to have no real direction gets things done eventually. But it is interesting to be able to watch from the inside to see just how messy it really is.
Well, Congressman, thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. Look for more on this on newsok.com and in the Oklahoman.